Hi, everyone, and welcome to Zoom Into Books. Today, we are thrilled to welcome back Don Helin with us. He will be doing a short story workshop for us today, and he's done one of these for us before, and it was fantastic. And during these sessions, he focuses on premise, character, setting, and dialogue. And today, we will be focusing specifically on character. And I will also mention that Don is an award-winning author with Headline Books, so he's got a lot of great tips for us. He's also going to be talking a little bit about the Next Generation Short Story Awards, which is a brand new awards program. So Don, thank you so much for coming back on to Zoom Into Books. We're really looking forward to having you on today.
Well, thank you very much, Ashley. It's always great to be here. And to be honest, it's always great to share the mic with you because I've known Ashley for a long time, and she is an incredibly talented author. And she piles on top of that ability as an artist. So she's kind of a one-stop show in putting together children's books.
Well, thank you, Don. I appreciate that.
Ashley, it's always a pleasure to be with you. Now, what I'd like to do, I was really pleased to see that Next Generation Indie Book Awards is going to short stories. I've been involved with the Indie Book Awards program for, oh my goodness, 10 years, I guess, something like that. And it's terrific. I first got involved with the program back in 2014. And if I remember right, the statistics were something like there were, believe it or not, 4 million books that were released that year. And of those 4 million, about 660,000 were from what they call the Big Six. And that meant over 3 million books really didn't have anything going for them as in the way of support. And that's where the Indie Book Awards took over. And as a result, a lot of people, including myself, were able to promote themselves through the Indie Book Awards, something we wouldn't have been able to do were it not for that program. So I'm always glad to talk about it. And at the same time, I'm glad they've decided to go a short story. My understanding is that the program has been going for, oh gosh, I guess a couple plus months. And I think it'll go till the end of February. And then they'll be cutting off and they'll have an awards program and all kinds of pluses, plus a lot of good publicity for the people who participate in the program. So I encourage you to get involved. I just want to show something on the screen here. This goes back to 2014 when I won the Best Suspense Thriller at the Indie Book Award ceremony in that year for my book, Secret Assault. And I don't say that to beat on my chest, but to really make you realize that what that was able to do for me was promote my books. It is something that were it not for the Indie Book Awards, then I would have never been able to do that. And my understanding is the Indie Book Awards program, it has like 25 categories. So you can pick a category and then it's 5,000 words or less. And as long as you're an author it's international, Canada, United States, internationally, you can go ahead and submit your short story with every chance that you could win something. And so it's a great program, and I'm delighted that I'm able to help with it. And what we're doing really is to do a kind of a wrap up on short story writing. Many of you have heard some of this, but for your background, many of you know that I spent a 30-year career in the Army. And when I got out, I had to say to myself, well, what's next? Not a big demand for a guy that's pretty good at writing Army regulations. And actually, I found that the Washington Post was having a uh, a travel writing symposium, which I actually attended, and it was an 8-week program. And what they taught us was what I like to call creative nonfiction, which is a way to try to, what you want to do is draw people into your article. For example, if I'm writing about the wolf sanctuary here in Lancaster, I want people to know about it so they'll want to come out and visit. That's the whole purpose of travel writing, and that's what a travel writer is trying to do. Then, after about 6 years as a travel writer, I got the bug to start writing fiction, and I've always loved suspense novels. And so I thought, why not? And it took me about 4 or 5 years to kind of get my act together. And, and then in 2009, I was able to publish my first suspense novel. And it's just been going ever since then. And it's been terrific. So I think whether you're writing a novel or a short story or a memoir or a play, you need characters. And you need characters that people can understand and want to be with. For example, in his story mastery workshop, Michael Haig said, the key for a successful novel is to elicit emotion from the reader. And the emotion is manifested through conflict. So at the core of every good story should be a protagonist, the protagonist's desire, and the conflict that arises from that desire. Because conflict is what's going to draw your reader in. And you must be able to present your character to your reader in a believable and interesting fashion. And I'm going to emphasize those two words because they sound easy, but they're not. And I want to make sure that it really sinks in. Your character has to be believable. You know, he can't jump over buildings with a single bound or any of that stuff. He's got to be believable, and he's got to be interesting. So keep this in mind as we move along. And we're going to be talking about, first of all, you got to know your know your characters. That's important. And secondly, you've got to be able to present those characters to your reader. And that's what it's all about. So we want to focus today on motivation. In novels, we've got character, plot, and setting. So the reader must be invested those characters. And it's the same thing for short stories and for memoir and all the different types of stories. So in most stories, there are two types of characters. And the first one, lots of times people take for granted. They're what I call a one-dimensional character, or they're the walk-ons. For example, a waiter, a doorman, taxi driver, bartender. They have a specific mission, specific function, and then they leave. And what you want to do is do away with cliches. That's what you always want to do. Get rid of cliches. For example, I was fortunate to be active with international thriller writers, and they meet every July in New York. So I had plenty of chances to travel in taxi cabs in New York City. And I think many of you who have been to New York and have traveled in taxis kind of know what you might expect. You get into a cab, somebody who's from another country, may not speak English very well. The cab may not be particularly clean, and he has trouble understanding you. So why not change that? Why not change it to somebody who is a poet? He's got a clean cab. So it's just a little thing, but it adds a little bit of difference and sets your novel aside. You can do the same thing with a bartender. Rather than having somebody that just, runs his rag up and down the bar, have him singing some opera or something to make him a little different. So that's the first kind. But the second kind is really the ones we want to focus today. And that's your three-dimensional characters. What makes us love these characters? That's what you're trying to figure out. And you need to have your reader invested in them. I'm going to mention it again. And I think as we go along, you'll see why this is so important. They've got to be interesting and they've got to be believable. So you need to have emotion. You've got to get inside your character. So your best characters are multifaceted. They are alive with passions and with ambition and complex motives and full of worries. You know what? They're just like all of us. They've got their grievances and everything. Now, the important thing to remember is nobody is all good or all bad. The villain should have some pluses. And I have to tell you, I always enjoy a villain. I think they're incredibly interesting to write about. He's one of my favorites. Now, he should not be simply a foil for your good guy, for your main character, but realize he's a hero in his own story. Repeat, he's a hero in his own story. What does he do and why does he do it? And he's got to be a worthy opponent for your character to have conflict. Probably the bad guy, the villain that we often talked about, is the Godfather. I think there were 3 movies about the Godfather, and they were terrific. But I think there's a good example. The Godfather wasn't necessary. He murdered people. Yes, he did. He did a lot of bad things. Yes, he did. But on the other hand, he was a proponent for all his friends, all the people he knew, and he was loved in his neighborhood. Let me give you just a very quick example. There was a man, he happened to be a funeral director, and he had an 18-year-old daughter he was so proud of. She was wonderful, beautiful, and he was gonna get married and go on to a great life. She was coming home one night, and 2 guys got her, beat her up, and raped her, and did all kinds of terrible stuff. I guess took 2 months before the father was able to bring up charges on these 2 guys. And after a short trial, it turned out that she told her story and these 2 guys told their story. And of course, they were all cleaned up and looking good. And the judge said, well, it appears to me that I can't tell. Both stories sound reasonable. So he let the guys go without anything. And here, this man's daughter was ruined. And as they walked out of the courtroom, they waved goodbye and said, well, we'll see you. So what did the guy do? He went to the Godfather. And he said, Godfather, he told him what happened. My daughter, been ruined. And these guys didn't get anything for it. That's just not right. And the Godfather said, you're right, it's not. So what did he do? He took 2 of his biggest, meanest guys, and they went out and beat the daylights out of these guys. Probably crippled them for life. Now, is that right? Is that legal? No, it's not. But I have to say I kind of leaned back and smiled about that. To see these guys, you want to see people get their just rewards or their just punishments. And that's what the Godfather did. So he wasn't all bad. He had a lot of good traits. He was loved, he took care of the people, and all this sort of stuff. So there needs to be a worthy opponent. Now, in my last novel, Buried Relics, I found myself with a Godfather in there. And that's what I tried to do. Now, that was interesting. The background on this book is that my grandson got me into the forgotten civilizations. Many of you have heard of Atlantis and all that sort of stuff. And I said, what? He said, Grandpa, you need to get on the ball and read about that. And he was absolutely right. And that's where Buried Relics started. And there is a wonderful story there about what happened And at the same time, I was able to bring a godfather in, and you'll see he was bad news. On the other hand, he wasn't all bad news. He had positive traits. And that's what we're trying to say. Your villain can't be all bad, and your good guy can't be all good. So, believability, let's move on to believability. The more bizarre the character's behavior, the earlier you need to have it so people understand what's going on. Otherwise, they're not going to go for it. For example, let's suppose a woman is attacked and she's running along. She sees an open door. She runs up 6 stairs and gets up to the roof and runs over to the end of the roof. And the guy's chasing her. And he comes up, and as he's coming at her, she pulls his arm, throws him over her shoulder, and hurts him badly. And then she says, "Boy, good thing I've been taking all that karate." Nobody's going to fall for that unless you have shown karate and her background in karate, and maybe showing her taking some classes at the gym, showing awards or anything like that. Now, one of my characters, Colonel Garcia, is a black belt in karate. And we'll see how in one of the books how that comes out. So the important thing is you need to make sure that it's believable. If you're going to do something like that, you need to make sure that people say, "Oh, they expect it." Don't just pull it out of the air, because then they're going to go, "Wow, I don't think that's very good." So your motive is what gives you your value to your character's act. You want to search for the extraordinary in your character. He's the average guy. Sometimes your hero's the average guy who rises above problems. When things go wrong, he doesn't whine or complain. He doesn't blame everybody else but himself. The way your character responds to problems lets the reader know who he is. So be aware and make sure your character has a sort of traits that will allow him to be able to respond like that. And we'll get into that in a minute. Okay, now something to remember. Characters differ in different places. And that helps flesh out and help us understand the character. Okay, here we are. When we're one character at work. And we're smooth and cultured and everything is going fine and all that sort of stuff. And then I go home, and my son's running around the house and we have some valuable vases. And I say, "Hey, settle down, stop it, because we don't want to break anything." And of course, he runs by, not paying any attention, knocks the table and knocks off a vase. Now, how are you going to react for that? Are you going to have a little bit different face than you might at work? Or are you just going to say, "Oh, Johnny, that's an unfortunate situation"? No, you're not. You're probably going to blast him with something. So characters need different responsibilities for different settings. So, if somebody is at work and then they go home and something happens, you'll see the different sides of their personality. But you want to give them traits so that they can handle the sort of things that come at them without really being bad. Because if they can't handle that, don't have the traits to do that, your readers may not care for them, may not like them. The other issue is, at the beginning, and I've read a lot of books, and so many, particularly new authors, tend to drop a ton of backstory into that first chapter. Born on a mountaintop in Tennessee and continued to do this, went to school. And you don't need all that. That's the worst thing you can do, because you stop the reader. You're going back, flashbacks end up stopping your story. And that's exactly, it stops the action. So what you want to do is only do those flashbacks or whatever after you have anchored your reader in the story. A better technique, I was very fortunate. After I published my first novel, I joined International Thriller Writers, and they have what's called a debut author program. And my mentor there was Lee Childs. And he told us that what the reader needs, give the reader what they need for that minute and that page. Don't give them any more. If they need to know something and it's not in what's going on right then, don't do it. Wait until they need to know it, and then you can share it with your reader at the same time you're sharing it with your hero. The other thing that I got from Lee is that, as many of you know, he has he's written, goodness, a lot of novels, but he has a series character, Jack Reacher. And people that I know really enjoy Jack Reacher. He just goes from one place to another, solving problems, and all he carries with him is that toothbrush in his pocket. And I got the idea because after my first book, Colonel Zach Kelly, I kind of liked him. And I liked the group. There's a small group of about 5, and they work together. They're the team that works for the president's national security advisor. And they help the national security advisor solve problems. So what we want to do is to just not over-explain. For example, readers will get it. For example, if he has you want to show he played football, just have him kind of hold his knee sometimes and say, "Oh man, I think he's still kind of sore on cold weather." You don't need to tell a reader how many touchdowns he scored, how fast he ran, what position he played, or anything like that. If you want them to know something about, just give them what I call a short burst. Don't give them the whole story of everything. Now, dialogue, if you're trying to tell a little background about your character, probably dialogue's not a good way to do. Because if you have 2 characters in chapter 1 or 2, John's talking to Harry, and John says, "Well, Harry, I did this and I did that, and you were doing that." So it's obvious to the reader that you're simply using that dialogue to give backstory. And that's going to bore them as much as a Facebook. So don't dump stuff on your reader. Now, Q&A is not a bad way to do it. For example, maybe you've got, he gets somehow with the police department and they ask him questions. Or you've got a reporter and he asks questions and you can explain what's going on, and that works. But be sure you don't just do that info dump, because, be aware that the reader is smart. They'll get it. A lot of people assume the reader's got to be spoon-fed, and that's not what they like. So what we want to do now, we've talked a little bit about how to present some of these things. Let's talk a little bit about our characters and how in the world do we give them what they need to be good characters. So what you want to do is visualize your character. What traits should they have for the job that you want them to do? And so the important thing to remember is you've got to give your character a whole life. You need to know what he's all about. Now, you don't need to share all that with your reader, but you need to understand your character and what he likes, what he doesn't like, and that then will give him motive and morale and all that to do the things you want him to do. And I didn't learn that lesson until, I guess it was about 2015. I ended up attending a workshop with James Fry, who was a creative writing director at Berkeley. And he's got an excellent book. If you are looking for something to help you develop characters, I think he's got a very good one. And it's How to Write a Damn Good Novel. And again, that knowledge and those traits, whether you're writing a novel or you're writing a short story or you're writing travel articles, it's the same thing with creative nonfiction. So let's just talk a little bit about characters. First of all, you've got physical characters. What are your character's physical traits? For example, you've got the normal height, weight, age, and you have to ask, why is that important? The trait itself isn't particularly important always, but it's what that meant for the development of the character. For example, let's suppose that Barbra Streisand couldn't sing. She grew up and she couldn't sing. Do you think she would have developed in a different way than she did as a singer? Of course. She'd probably be a bank manager or something else. So the trait that she had, the ability to sing beautifully, is what helped shape her and move her down the developmental road. And think for another moment about Hank Aaron, one of the greatest baseball players that ever lived. Suppose he couldn't, had a bad left arm, couldn't play baseball. Would he have developed the way he did? Absolutely not. So your characters, all of us, have given traits. And what we need to do is develop those traits. And, when was your character born? Was he in the kind of the Flower Children 60s or the go-go computer group in the 70s, 80s, 90s? I remember I was down in San Antonio and I'd rented a car and I was going to take my grandson out go someplace. And he said, "Grandma, turn the radio on." I said, I can't, I don't know. Hey, he pushed 7 buttons and on it came in the right, you like that sound, like that sound. I had no idea because that's not my bag. I tried to learn it, but I didn't know it at the time. So based on what time period you grew up in is going to be how it affects you. I was part of the Vietnam generation, and that's affected me a little differently than somebody who was born in 1990, for example. And so all of these things go to helping you, what you want to do. You want to learn your character so you can present that character. Physical traits, again, are very important. Is your character tall, short, big, little? Is he small and a nerd and bullied? Like that god-awful incident that happened in Iowa. I think that was a bullying incident. And those things are terrible. But it's basically how he grew up and how it designed him. So that's what he did. Then you got the large guy. Maybe he's a football player, but he's also pushes his weight around. He might have too much to drink. He might get kicked out of school. So different things. People grow up. They're beautiful. They're pretty. They're not pretty. They're even ugly. They're short. They're tall. They're fat as a child. I tell you, if you're heavy as a child, that can really affect how you grew up, and it's a trait that will stay with you. And so you need to understand what makes your character kick physically. And that's the important thing. Okay, so we got the physical traits, and these are height and weight, where they were born, all that sort of stuff, time period. Let's go to the second trait, and this is sociological, or the social class. What kind of neighborhood did your character grow up in? Was he rich? Is he poor? Did he get enough to eat? You have a single parent? What city or state? I have friends who grew up in New York City, and I have friends who grew up in Montana. I'm telling you, they're different people. They have different traits. They think differently sometimes. Their motivation is different. And how about Alabama or California? Each of these places are different. So what you want to do is say that, my hero, Zach Kelly, grew up in Minneapolis. And so I grew up in Minneapolis. So I can kind of figure out how he would react to things. And the advantage is, particularly with a series character, you can keep him and kind of realize what's going to cause problems for him and what is able to put away. Or where did he go to school? Did he go to PS, Public School 109 in New York City? Or did he go to a private school up on New England? Are those guys going to grow up differently? Are they going to feel things differently? Probably. How about politics, membership? And I have learned, do not, under any circumstances, present or argue about politics. That's not something that I want to do. But I did want to mention this book that we have. And what I did missing is a story of somebody using artificial intelligence to cook the books and steal the election. And I made the person who's doing this a third party because it came up in a very dynamic time of 2020, right before that presidential election. And I wanted my friends from all different political parties to be able to buy this book because it was a good story. Also, it was a lot of fun to learn about artificial intelligence. And also, I would like to point out that, again, an advantage of the Indie Book Awards is I was a finalist in the Indie Book Awards, and I can put that on the cover, and that provides some status to readers that this is a pretty good book. So again, that becomes a fan that I am of Indie Book Awards. So I think what we want to do is that once we've come up with the religion, I steer pretty clear of that. But discipline, how about, was he able to run free or was he beaten at home? Where does he live? Factory or whatever. My daughter teaches in San Antonio, and she was on the Southwest side for several years. And some of these young ladies, 14 years old, have some real problems with initiations and all that sort of stuff. And what sort of chance do they have? They're growing up in a whole different world than I probably did in Minneapolis. So the reader has to understand the development, even if she can't fully understand his motivation, his relationships, the habits, so that for you as the writer, your motivation is so important. It produces conflict. So for my hero, Colonel Zach Kelly, he has a lot of problems with people who don't do the right things because that's how he grew up. And so he would protect somebody from an attack. Now, Zach is a divorced father of a 16-year-old daughter. And his ex-wife, because she was depressed, took drugs and ended up in jail selling drugs. So when his daughter turned 18, Zach ended up as a single parent. And what you want to do is give your character different responsibilities that make it tougher for them and make them show more than the average person. So we have what's called professional experience, like, well, Zach's trying to save the world. He's at the Pentagon, and he's getting ready to go out and save the world, and he gets a phone call. He said, Dad, remember, it's 4:30 and you're due to come home and help me with my coach our soccer team. So there's that tug and pull for your character that we all have. And that's what makes your character responsible and recognized by your reader. And that's what you want to do. So we've talked about physical, we've talked about sociological. How about psychologically? What's your character? Phobias, fears, inhibitions? Sometimes some of the villains can have some really unusual phobias. How about IQ? Is this the kind of guy that just learns everything, or does he really have to work on it? And so these are the sort of things that help you understand the reader. And it can help your reader if they can kind of understand your character. And so what you want to do is just give them enough about that character so they can get a feeling for it. They don't need to know everything about your guy. What they need to know is just enough so it makes sense to them the way he reacts. Now, Zach, because of his 3 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq, has a moderate case of post-traumatic stress disorder. That's kind of the other thing that I gave him, so he has to deal with. So the post-traumatic stress is, he's never sure when it's going to cause a problem for him. Now, in my book, Devil's Den, which takes place in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, all of a sudden, my hero, Zach, is taking a friend to Gettysburg because she's never been there. And she runs out in the battlefield. She wants to see what is going on. And all of a sudden, Zach has a kind of a fallback, and he kind of blanks out for a few seconds. He comes to and she's gone. She's disappeared. Where did she go? One of the most haunted places in the country. Nobody can find her. So that starts the mystery. And part of that is because Zach has a trait that causes problems for him. Donald Moss, who's one of the great agents, said that you should surprise your reader. List the usual stereotypes and then design your reader, your writer, your person to be just the opposite. One of my favorites is Rodney Barnes. Elaine and I were up in Canada on a trip, and she's quite an artist. So oftentimes we'll go in. I love to go into bookstores because I love to listen to a conversation and I pick up ideas. And she loves to go in and see different people. That it might give her an idea for a picture of a painting. And all of a sudden, this guy comes in, and he's got orange hair on top and red hair and back and a little pigtail back there. He's got nose ring. He's got around his hands earrings, black boots, black jacket. And I looked at him and I thought, I don't know when, but I think he may fit. So I talked to Elaine and I said, can you get his picture? I think so, sure. And she's good at it because what she'll do is she'll hold her camera up and she'll shake it, look at it like it's not working right. And in the meantime, she's taken 4 or 5 pictures. So I took that picture, put it in my file for characters. And one day, the perfect opportunity came out. Remember, I mentioned that Zach is now the single parent of an 18-year-old daughter. And one day, Zach comes home from work. And there's a big old car out in front. And he sees this young man up talking to his daughter. And what does he look like? He's got that orange hair and a red pink boot, got all these rings, the black jacket, and all that sort of stuff. And Zach thinks, oh no, Laura, what are you? So Zach puffs up the sidewalk, kind of full of himself, and Laura says, Dad, this is Rodney Barnes. I haven't really told you I've been dating Rodney for a few months because he's not quite your kind of guy. But, he's the lead singer for the Evildoer rock band. And I wanted you to meet him, and I'm glad you met him because I really like Rodney. And I thought maybe you'd come and hear his band with me some night. Of course, here's Zach. Yeah, just trying to figure out how in the world he's going to deal with that. Because if you knew Zach, like I know, he's a pretty straight-laced guy. He's not necessarily in guys like that. That's not his thing. Particularly when it's with his daughter. And so he muffles it. And so Rodney takes off in his big old van. And of course, they get into it immediately and slams the door. And Zach realizes he's really messed up. And so we have problems for Zach. And these are problems that he's going to have to solve. And when we look at Rodney, immediately, what do you see? You see what Zach saw. But now, what is Rodney Barnes really like? Is he really a good guy? Or is he really a problem? Of course, you have to read the book to find out. But what I'm trying to show you is that we pick things. When we see somebody, we have, based on the traits that we have, we say, that's that. And immediately, Zach says, this guy's a bum. He has no reason. He's a musician. He's probably a good guy. But Zach doesn't see it that way. And that's because this is a cliche character. And so if you paint a cliche character for your readers, they might be the same, or you might find out 50 pages down that this guy's a pretty good guy that could save the day. Who knows? But this is what we're trying to say, is to make sure that you have traits. So when people have kind of been around Zach, they get the idea, and they're not surprised when Zach has a problem with this guy, because he's kind of that. He's not square, but he's kind of conservative that way. Army colonel, he's not necessarily bad on a lot of that stuff, but for his daughter, he certainly has a little bit of a problem with that. So what you want to do is sit down and put together these traits for your character. So your character, that. You know these traits, but your reader doesn't know them all. And so you want to know, and it's also very important for me with a series character like Zach. I mean, we're just finishing book number 9 with him. And so people have gotten to know him over time. And so they are kind of know what to expect from him. And if you throw that off, then there's a little bit of a problem. People say, well, what's wrong with Zach? So really, you've got 2 challenges. You have what I call the professional. Zach's professional challenge is at work. He wants to save the world somehow. There's a problem. There's a bomb attack. There's a problem going on. And his job is to try to stop it. So that's his professional. But you also have on the private side. These are the things. His private challenge is to spend time with his daughter. And where, she's a little uneasy about him because she's just been sent to live with him, and she's not sure about this guy. So he really needs to help be with her. And if she says, Dad, you promised me. He said, well, I haven't got time to do that. Would Zach do that? I don't think he would, but your reader has got to figure out, how does that come? What are those traits? And what is it that prevents our hero from getting involved. So now we have this, what I call almost a laundry list of traits. So now what are we going to do? And what we want to do is present those to your reader in an interesting and believable way. And I found this short description from Reader's Digest that I just want to read two descriptions that are used for this character. And I think you'll see where I'm coming from. Avery McNaughton is 22, 5'6", and a little overweight, with chestnut hair and green eyes. Okay, this is kind of the traits. She was born in Boston, okay, but now lives in Houston and works as a lawyer. She dresses sensibly, lives in a 2-bedroom apartment, seldom socializes, and reads ferociously. So these are the traits about her. And is that an interesting way to present them? Probably not. But let's try another approach. Let's say Avery McNaughton almost died from pneumonia when she was 6 after an ice skating accident. Her older brother, Mark, read to her while she was bedridden. That's where her love of literature began. Now, Mark died in a car accident at age 22, and Avery's terror at falling through the ice returned. She never has felt safe in the world since. She's moved from Boston to Houston to escape her memories and winter. She has no friends, wants none, and dresses as though she thought to be invisible. So what we've done with the second is to put together a story that's interesting to the reader. And what we would want to do is to simply give the reader bits of that in that particular way. You don't want to just give the reader a 5'2", eyes of blue approach. You want to give that reader a story, but so they understand. Now, characters will reveal themselves when they are tested. And that's the thing. Like Zach, when he was tested by Rodney, I'm not sure he passed. So there must be tension on every page, because tension, the character has got to be pulled in a couple of directions. Dialogue that's misunderstood, or working at 2 levels, danger, conflict. So what we have tried to do is talk a little bit about our character and how we want to develop those traits. Now, for those of you who attended the prior course, you remember that we talked about the 6 archetypes of conflict. And that's really important because conflict is what's going to build your story. And you have, first type is man versus self. And that's usually somebody that has a drug problem or alcoholic. There's something that they fight themselves all the time. The second one is man versus man. That would be the thrillers or mysteries where you have one man versus another, or one woman against another. Another one might be man versus society, and that's the, as we've talked about, science fiction. And then you've got human survival, and then the 5th one is technology, and that's the robots. So what you want to do is to frame your story into one of these archetypes of conflict. For us, one of the best ways is man versus man, or woman versus woman, person versus person. That's your mysteries. That's your thrillers. And if you read and you enjoy a number of my authors that I love to read, they have not only man versus man, person versus person, but man versus himself. Some of these detectives have problems with alcohol or whatever, And so they're fighting themselves, that first archetype. At the same time, they're trying to fight the other guy, man versus man. So that can really make for a great story. And I think you would enjoy that a lot. So I think the bottom line is you want to let dread fill your story, and failure can be a real problem. Give your hero something to lose. Now, we talked about traits. I put together for each of my characters, I've got 6 characters that are recurring in every book. And then I've got the villain, and I've got other people that become important. And as soon as they become important and they're with me for a while, then I'm going to have to put together. Now, my hero, Zach Kelly, he's 6'2", 195 pounds. He keeps himself in pretty good shape. He was born in New York City, and his father was on the police force and was shot and killed in a drug bust. So he was raised by his mother, has 2 sisters, and he's very protective of his family, causing him to drop out of the University of Minnesota after 1 year, not a great student. Then he completed Airborne Ranger School and went in the Army. And the many separations from his time in the Army has caused him to have a divorce from his wife. And he was on his own until his daughter came to live with him. Now, what's his motivation? His motivation is to build a relationship with his daughter. And I think the reader will understand that. He will try to, whatever he's doing, to build a relationship with his daughter while working the hours necessary to do his job at the Pentagon. That's his motivation. His fears, Zach is a driven personality. We kind of picked that up from his time growing up. He dropped out of college. He ended up taking his college night school. So he's a driven personality. And guilt, he didn't do enough to keep his marriage together. So that's the sort of things that will drive Zach. And so as a result, we've tried to talk about the value, and I hope many of you will write a short story or 2 and submit them. You can submit a number, and you've got a couple of, not quite a couple months, end of February, to complete it, 5,000 words, and give it a try. You got really nothing to lose but a little, and you might enjoy it. You might have a lot of fun doing it. Now, last time we talked a little bit about a premise, and really what we've got is that Zach and his daughter are working together to try to develop that relationship. And his quest is to try to do his job while at the same time taking care of his daughter. And then he's going to run into each book. He runs into a different, what's called a time bomb. Something happens that causes his whole life to get turned into turmoil. And then we talked about pressure and response. Something happens, he responds, something more happens, and that continues to build the conflict. And that's what we've been talking about with the story. So we have talked a little bit about how to develop your premise so that you can get a good story going. Today, we've tried to talk some about characters and how important it is. And the character is really the one that's going to decide whether or not you're successful. Because if people don't like your character, they will tend to put that book down. Coming up in the next presentation, probably in the next 2-3 weeks, we'll talk about setting and how important that is. It's what I call setting the table. You've got to make sure your character is not just floating around in space, but has a good setting to work in. And then the last time, we'll do a little wrap up and talk about dialogue. So I think Ashley, are we able to kind of pull this together? And do we have some questions? Do you know?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dawn. That was fantastic. We really appreciate all of your tips and your insights. That was wonderful. And for anyone just joining us or maybe who joined late, the replay will be available here on the Zoom Into Books Facebook page, as well as the Zoom Into Books YouTube channel. We do have one question here that has come in. So, Dawn, whenever you are writing, do you find it easier to work on novels or short stories?
Oh, that's a good one. When I get going on a novel, oftentimes I'll be going, and I kind of know where it's going, and I try to build on that. A short story is something that if I get stuck on a novel, I might try to start thinking about a short story. Um, and also, I teach a memoir class, so I'm working on memoirs and helping people tell their own life story. So, but I've enjoyed, and we have fun doing short stories at my writers group right here where I live. We have a short story program, but it's more flash fiction, and it's 1,000 words or less. And I guess I'm just too verbose to try to get everything I want to get to in 1,000 words. But I have been more successful with short stories that are longer. And sometimes it's fun to, after complete a novel and get into the marketing, what you want to do is to write a couple of short stories. It kind of keeps your mind working, but you're not ready to start something else. So that's a good question. Thank you.
Great. Yes. Another question, can you discuss a little bit about your personal process when it comes to the beginning of your writing? So when you first get an idea, do you outline first? Do you jot down general notes about plot, or how do you really start a project?
Well, I have a lot of friends who are outliners. What do they call it? They have outliners or pantsers, people that live by the seat of their pants. I guess I've always been more of a pantser because I kind of feel if I take the time to outline, I have already done so much. But it does usually sometimes get me in trouble because I'll head down a road and realize that's probably not the road I want to go down. But it's interesting. I think the easiest way to explain it is it's always in my mind. And I know sometime I'll be sitting there watching television, and Elaine said, Don, Don, what's going on? And I'll look at her and I'd say, I'm writing, and she knows that because it's just something triggers. I'll be reading a newspaper article and I'll say, that might work. And that just triggers all of that. So whether or not it's a short story or a novel, it's more likely to be a novel because of the length. But the bottom line answer is I tend to write as I go. And then, of course, they say writing is rewriting, and it's by the time I finish a draft that I want to share with Kathy, I've probably gone through 11 or 12
Oh,
drafts.
yes.
So the first draft is not something you're really proud of, but I always tell people finish it. You'll never get going if you don't finish that first draft. A lot of people, I had a good friend who just would write a half a novel. Oh, I don't like it. I start over again. If you just plow on through and realize you've got a lot of time, and I've been blessed with some really good friends who over the years have been great readers for me, and they're incredibly valuable. And I'm sure you found the same thing, Ashley.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Critique groups are where it's at.
Yeah, worth their weight in gold, right?
Oh, that is so true. Well, that is great, Don. It's nice I'm always curious about the plotter versus pantser. So that's nice to hear your take on that too. So yeah,
Sure.
that's great. Well, again, for anyone joining us late, feel free to watch the replay of this. Also, as Don mentioned, he talked about the short story awards quite a bit. Take a look at that website, that's shortstoryawards.com. As he was saying too, there's over 25 categories for your short stories there. So do take a look and some time to peruse through there. They also have social media channels for all of the major social networks. So be sure to give them a follow as well. And also, as I mentioned earlier, you can rewatch this video on the YouTube channel. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so that you can be notified whenever we post new videos. So with that, Don, I will say thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate your insight, and it's always lovely having you on. So thanks again.
Well, thanks again, Ashley. I've enjoyed it. Take care now.
You too. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and happy writing.